In this final video, I just want to narrate how the churches denominationally responded to issues around slavery, both before and during the Civil War. American Protestant churches with large Southern membership experienced significant divisions over slavery for the most part. And the debate here centers on who is correctly interpreting the Bible on the question of slavery. So in 1844, the Methodist Episcopal Church, this would be the forerunner to the contemporary United Methodist Church, divides over whether slaveholders could be bishops. Regular members were permitted to hold slaves. The question is, could bishops? This argument leads to the split into a Methodist Episcopal Church South and the Methodist Episcopal Church in the North. These two bodies are reunited only in 1939 as the United Methodist Church. In 1845, Baptists split over the question of whether slave-holding missionaries could be appointed by mission boards. The issue here is that slave-holding Alabama Baptists were rejected by the Boston-based Board of Missions, which was abolitionist-leaning because of this issue. This leads to the creation of the Southern Baptist Convention, which exists to this day. In the North, you have the American Baptist Convention as the dominant form. We find that there is no reconciliation between Southern Baptists and other Baptist entities. Indeed, both before and after the Civil War, both black and white Southern Baptist churches grow rapidly. By and large, in the South, Baptist churches were segregated according to white and black conventions. And so generally, black folks were not part of the white Southern Baptist Convention, especially in the post-Civil War period. In 1857, the Presbyterian Church also divides over slavery and how Scripture ought to be interpreted in light of this question. The northern and southern branches split. The northern branch grows more rapidly than the southern branch. And these two entities reunite in 1983 as the Presbyterian Church USA. This isn't in the notes, but I do want to add that in the Roman Catholic Church, slaveholding was also common and was permissible according to the arguments of Southern bishops. Indeed, you have religious orders that hold slaves. You also have religious orders made up of formerly enslaved people. And so this was also a practice tolerated in the Roman Catholic context. The Episcopal Church is really unique in this light in that the Episcopal Church does not split prior to the Civil War over slavery. This is because, by and large, they completely avoided debating the issue in General Convention. The presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, even though he is a bishop in Vermont, writes a defense of slaveholding, in fact. So the Episcopal Church chooses to lay aside the issue of slavery and permits slaveholding by its members and its bishops. So that by the outbreak of the Civil War, virtually every Southern bishop is a slaveholder and indeed often runs a plantation. But the outbreak of the Civil War means that two different civil entities emerge. You have the United States of America, and you have a new entity known as the Confederate States of America. And so because a new civil reality exists, the Southern dioceses reconstitute themselves as the Protestant Episcopal Church in the Confederate States of America. In contrast, in the United States, you still have the Protestant Episcopal Church of the United States of America. So the PECCA and the PECUSA. And they meet in separate general conventions during the Civil War. The Protestant Episcopal Confederate Church was established by Bishop Leonidas Polk of Louisiana. Indeed, Polk later becomes a brigadier general and is killed in battle. He is an ardent defender of slaveholding as an institution. He is a slaveholder himself, and he is very much in support of the creation of the Confederacy. And Polk writes to the Southern diocese and argues that fidelity to the nation or fidelity to the state has to be negotiated with fidelity to existing church structures. And so he writes, the state as well as the church is a divine institution. So again, you have these long-standing Christian notions of the relationship between church and state that are being played out here in the context of the Confederacy in this newly established Episcopal Church. And so Polk argues that loyalty to both the state and the church is required. And he argues that as the state changes, church structure must change along with it. So he's really following the argument of Henry VIII. It's really an Anglican argument in its own strange way, that the church must adapt to its context, and that if the church finds itself in a new political reality, it has to shape itself according to that. It must respond to that in some way. And so Polk says there's no schism with the Episcopal Church of the United States. For us, the Episcopal Church of the Confederate States. Rather, we retain the Catholicity of the church. We have our order of bishops, we have our traditions, we have our teachings from scriptures, and we share these in common with the Episcopal Church of the United States. And so even though there's a political division because of the war, there is a unity based in a kind of Catholicity. This is a very hard argument to hear from someone who defends the enslavement of other people. But it's important to name that this is the kind of logic that was operative within the theology of the Episcopal Church during this time. And we know it's operative because there is no punishment given for the formation of this Confederate Church. After the Civil War, the northern and southern dioceses and bishops meet together in General Convention, and the southern bishops are received with open arms. There's no effort at reconciliation, and indeed there's no question posed about how do we amend for the treatment of those that were enslaved, those that this church enslaved, those that these bishops and lay people enslaved. So this is a sort of legacy then that will echo throughout the rest of American Christian history. Who counts? How is unity achieved? How is justice maintained? How are reparations made?